Welcome, everyone, to this bonus episode of the Antinatalist Advocacy podcast, where we speak with interesting and knowledgeable people about how best to protect sentient beings from the harms of coming into existence. I am your host, John, an antinatalist advocate from the UK, and I'm delighted that you can join us for today's episode. For today's bonus episode, we're bringing you the audio of a live stream posted on Lawrence's channel titled 5 Steps for Doing Good as an Antinatalist. As you probably know by now, our main aim with Antinatalist Advocacy is to support the antinatalist community in its capacities to do good, and we wanted to condense our ideas into some sort of easy-to-pull-out list of key actions that people can take. I'm personally a big fan of lists of 5, as 3 is a little too short, and 10, it can be sometimes hard to remember everything. So Lawrence and I put our heads together to hash out these 5 key steps, which we'll be talking through in this episode. We're also planning on writing up some sort of handout with these 5 steps that we're hoping will act as a handy guide for people with helpful links that can be shared, that kind of thing. So please do let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Anyway, without further ado, I bring you this bonus episode of the Antinatalist Advocacy podcast with Lawrence and Tom. Enjoy.
Okay, so we are live. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope that they enjoyed the little intro that I've added there. Right, sorry, I was just checking our audio is all good. John, do you just want to talk now, and I'll make sure your audio is all good?
Hello, testing.
Okay, nice one. Let's wait for that to come through. Thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, your audio is working. Okay,
Right.
cool. All right, we're good. So thanks everyone for joining. I think the first thing we've got to say is the fact you're in a suit.
Oh, well.
John has decided to dress up for this stream because it's a very important stream.
No, Lawrence is being shy. I'm actually taking him out on a date after this. And as you can see, I'm dressed for the occasion and Lawrence hasn't.
And given I'm dressed like this, they're going to think that I'm you're my carer rather than my date.
Exactly. No, I've just walked in from work. I don't fortunately have to wear a suit every day, but it was one of those rare occasions.
Very busy people. Okay, so what is this stream about? Before we get into anything, let's quickly go over what this stream is about. Because I think people will get the basics of what it is about from the title and the thumbnail, but there's a bit more context we can give people. So, as people may know, John and I run a currently small, but
very small.
over time things will develop. Organization called Antinatalist Advocacy, and we could go into a whole spiel about it, but the basic thing that we really want to do that is relevant to this live stream is that we really want to help antinatalists and the antinatalist community develop their capacity for doing good in the world, right?
Yeah.
Both as individuals, but also as a community generally. And one of the ways we want to do that is by putting a 5-step guide together that is in the early stages of development at the moment, but will come about at some time in this year. We won't confirm when now, but it will be sometime this year, and we're sort of developing it at the moment. And we basically wanted to do this we wanted to do this live stream so that we can sort of present the basic idea behind the 5-step guide for essentially helping facilitate antinatalists do more good with the capacity for doing good that they have. And we wanted to basically present the sort of basic idea behind it and bounce it off people.
Yeah.
So, John, do you have anything to add to that in terms of context before? Have I missed anything?
No, I think that's everything. Let's dive in.
Cool. So before we dive into the actual 5 steps, another thing I want to say is that, as I've just said, this is in the very early stages of development, and we want feedback on this. We want to refine it, all of this sort of stuff. So we want this live stream to be like very interactive. So I see Louis and CDA Activism have already messaged in the chat. If you're watching at the moment, I think there's 8 people watching at the moment. Please do say hello in the chat, and also throughout the live stream, put in your questions, put in your comments, all of this sort of stuff, and we will address them, talk about them, and that all that good stuff. So we do want people's feedback and interaction on this stream. So let's get into it then. So John, before we go into the individual 5 steps, if someone is to follow these 5 steps that we're going to present, where is it going to guide them? What's the purpose of these 5 steps, even though I've kind of said it briefly at the start?
Absolutely. So the purpose of these steps is not meant as a an all-encompassing way to live your life. It's something that Lawrence and I were talking about just before, how sometimes antinatalism can be viewed as like, a guide to one's life, and it's definitely not meant that way. This is just, from our understanding, these like 5 evidence-supported steps that people can take, all if not most of them, that will help people who share antinatalist beliefs to have more positive impact in the world in a way that aligns with their antinatalist ethics. It's not necessarily a linear order. So it's not like if you don't do step 2, you can't then move on to step 3. We've tried to put them in a logical order, the order that makes the most sense to us, and also starting in a way that's like easier to do, going on to slightly more challenging to do. We don't consider any of the steps to be especially difficult, but because we are trying to make these steps as accessible as possible. But the idea is, if people were to take these 5 steps as antinatalists, we believe they would have evidence to suggest that they would be able to have a positive impact in the world. And as we said, we're trying to make them as accessible as possible so people can do all, some, if not all, of these 5 steps.
Yeah, 100%. And also what's worth saying as well is that we're not trying to say these are the only 5 steps people can
Absolutely
take.
not. No.
To do good in the world as antinatalists. There will be other things. It's just, we thought that these are 5 really big ones, that if you get these down, you're on a really solid trajectory to, increasing the amount of good that you'll do in the world. And also, 5 is a nice round number.
It is. 5 is the perfect number. I think any longer than 5, to get a nice round number, you have to go to 10, and 10 is probably too many. You can't remember all of them. 5 is probably about as long as a list needs to be to stick in people's heads. And as we said, we feel that these 5 do follow on from each other in a nice kind of trajectory.
Yeah. So cool. Let's go over the first one then. So the first one, very obvious. Don't have any more children.
Yes.
Now, someone might think, oh, what do they mean don't have any more children? Now, the reason we put that in is because antinatalism is an idea, right? It's an ethical stance. Now, downstream of antinatalist ideas, there will be certain behaviors that change as a result of adopting these ideas, right? And one of those will be not having children, right? But some people come to antinatalism when they've already had children, which there's nothing wrong with, and actually that can be even more valuable, because they bring a different sort of insight and a different approach. So that's to get that out of the way. So John, what are your thoughts on why we put this in as a step of doing good in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to follow on from your points about the wording is super important, because as you said, anyone can come across these ideas at any point. They could have had 15 children and then become an antinatalist. So we definitely don't want to say don't have any children, and then people who are parents who come across antinatalist ideas think that they've missed the boat, or that that they can't take the other 5 steps because step 1 they've already failed it. And again, just to go back to the point earlier, this isn't meant as like a test. You have to pass every stage to go on to the next one. But in terms of why we believe it's important not to have any more children, obviously, to protect your children from the harms of coming into existence. That's why a lot of people are antinatalists. To protect other sentient beings, others who come into existence from the harm that your children is likely to do. And also to free up your capacity for the other 4 steps. So each of the 4 steps that follow not having any more children is made more difficult by having children, because you have other dependents, other priorities to attend to, as well as trying to have a positive impact on the world. So for the ethical reasons that, again, we don't need to go over them. We're an antinatalist channel. The ethical reasons that people have for choosing not to have any more children, we already know those. But then also your capacity to do good with the other 4 steps.
Yeah, 100%. And just 2 things on those to really sort of flesh it out and make the point obvious is that creating someone and raising them, generally, at least in the West, to like 18, and then they're sort of considered an adult, or maybe 21 in America. Maybe it's a different age in other countries. Raising someone requires a lot of emotional energy, a lot of financial resources, and a lot of time, all of which can be put to helping others who already exist or who will exist regardless of what our decisions are, right?
Yes.
And so choosing to create someone is essentially just creating, to put it crassly, a money sink or a time sink for the money and the time and the energy that you could have been putting into helping many other people or other animals, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I didn't want to put too fine a point on it, but I think that's really key to understand, is that there is an opportunity cost with having children, right?
Absolutely. To put some numbers on this, in the UK, at a low estimate, especially with the the high inflation that we've got here in the UK, it's roughly £210,000 to raise a child here. If you were just, instead of with that £210,000, if you were looking to do good by saving human lives, especially the lives of children from malaria, so children obviously being harmed by dying from malaria who do exist, you could save approximately 70 lives from 70 individuals from dying from malaria, with the cost of raising 1 child in the UK. Again, those are just kind of round numbers. It's an approximation, but it just gives you an idea of how expensive raising a new child can be compared to doing good for those who currently do exist or will exist in the future.
Yeah, 100%. And Carnism Debunked has just put in the chat that he's a fanatic, his religion is misanthropy, and the first commandment is go and get a vasectomy, which does lead into this first one. So obviously, if you're not going to have children or any more, if you're a bloke anyway, getting a vasectomy is a pretty surefire way of, nipping that in the bud.
Yes. And Carnism Debunked, I will be getting the snip later this year. I think I mentioned on the previous episode that I hadn't got the snip yet, so I'm getting around to it.
Yeah, now he's made the public commitment. So yeah, and I just want to say one final sort of thing of interest on this first one before we move on, is when I was doing research for a video on whether Mahatma Gandhi was an antinatalist, which, just long story short, he wasn't. But one interesting thing that I found out is that there's a cultural difference between Western countries and India, in that in a Western country, when we look at a politician or a celebrity or someone like that, if they have children, if they have a family, they're seen as having a buy-in in society, or seen as relatable, right? It's something that's really valued. And actually a lot of politicians, or especially prime ministers, get photos with their family as sort of like propaganda pieces and stuff like that.
And also people say if you haven't got children, then you don't really care what the future is going to look like.
Yeah.
So it's almost seen as like you're staking your claim in the future. I care about the future because I've got kids.
Yeah. And interestingly, when I was doing the research for the Gandhi video, I was talking to a friend of mine who is from India. And he was saying that there's a cultural difference in that in India, if a politician chooses not to have children, that is actually seen in essentially the same way as we see politicians who do have children here. In that it's seen as virtuous for a politician to do that, because they are foregoing foregoing the opportunity of having a family because they want to spend their time and energy in service to the nation or the people, etc. So that was an interesting cultural difference. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because, it kind of fits in with this first one. It's like, don't have children. One of the reasons is so you don't impose the harms of coming into existence, but it's also, foregoing what many people say as what many people see as a sort of, one of the things that is really fulfilling in life, having a child, right?
Yeah.
It's foregoing that so that you can put those resources and your time and energy in service of doing good in the world and in service of others. So yeah, it was just an interesting aside there. Right, you ready to go on to number 2?
Let's do it. I feel like we're moving off the safe terrain that everyone will agree on. Onto a more controversial one, but we'll see.
I know, exactly. Now we're going straight into the deep end. So the next one, the step 2, is becoming vegan. And what I'm going to do is hand over to John for this one so that I don't have to explain it.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason that we're antinatalists, or the people who consider themselves ethical antinatalists, is they're concerned about the ethics of creating new sentient beings or bringing suffering into the world. A being that didn't ask to be here, life is imposed upon that being, then they have to go through harm because they were created. And there are many ways that we can create sentient beings, but the number one way and the most obvious way we've already touched on, which is having our own children. But even if you were to have many, many children in your life, if you were to have 20, 25 and be considered quite a prolific parent, that would be a tiny number compared to the number of animals that a typical person causes to come into existence in the world. In the West, it's several thousand animals per person because they pay for agriculture. These animals are bred into existence because the persons, they pay for this to happen. Now, we're not going to get into the moral value of a human versus the moral value of a chicken or a pig or a cow or a fish or anything like that. But one thing I do think we have to recognize is that as bad as human lives can be, fortunately for most people, they are nowhere near as bad as the lives of animals in agriculture, especially intensive agriculture, factory farming, whichever term you'd like to use. So if we are against bringing suffering into the world, I think you called it, Lawrence, an own goal from antinatalist ethics. And I totally agree that if you're against bringing suffering into the world, choosing to pay for thousands of sentient beings to be brought into existence only to live miserable lives and then be stabbed to death at a slaughterhouse, it doesn't seem to align with those ethics. And that's even if you think, as I do actually, that non-human animals have less moral value than human animals. Just the fact that they have the capability to suffer and the fact that there are so many of them, thousands of animals that are brought into existence from each one individual, at least in a Western country, choosing to pay for agriculture. This is why we believe that, yes, to uphold antinatalist values and to stop all that suffering, we believe that people should go vegan. Now, one thing I will say is that in the same way with these 5 steps, we're not saying it's do all 5 or you're a complete failure or it's like a test to pass. Obviously, if one person was to reduce their animal consumption, even by a small amount, that would do a tremendous amount of good. But the reason that we have said go vegan is because there are benefits to going the full way and going vegan, as Lawrence and I have done, as many antinatalists do, not just in terms of the suffering that you prevent from coming into existence, but in terms of people seeing the moral stance that you take. You say that this is immoral and therefore I don't take part in it. Not to say this is immoral, therefore I do it a little bit less, which is a moral standard that we wouldn't have for people. We say this is immoral, we're not going to take part in it, and this is my stand. There is a further benefit of going 100% vegan compared to not.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is just that when people talk about veganism, and both non-vegans and vegans are guilty of this, is our mind instantly just goes to food, right? Yes. And I think sometimes people view people, I know they definitely view people like me. I don't know if you've ever had this, John, but there are some people in the antinatalist community that I think get uncomfortable with people with other antinatalists trying to attach veganism to antinatalism, right? And I think it's, I think it's maybe like anyone who kind of gets a bit uncomfortable when veganism is brought up, because they maybe feel like someone is trying to force them to change or something, and especially change something that they're probably very comfortable with, right? But what I want people to understand who maybe think like that, and I don't know if any of the people who are watching right now or who will watch this do fall into this camp, although I think some of them will, is that what we are not trying to do is attack people's sort of sense of security or comfortableness or anything like that. What we're simply trying to say is, for the same reasons that we would not bring other human beings into existence, those same reasons apply to other animals.
Yes.
To potentially the same degree or even more, given the fact that their lives are often so much worse, right?
Yes. And there are so many of them. Again, if you had 10 kids, that's still way fewer than the number of animals that people bring into existence.
Exactly. And this doesn't just apply to, we're not trying to get, some sort of diet conformity with people. Now, obviously, a vegan diet does have parameters, but like withdrawing our participation as much as is practical as possible from the act of bringing other animals into existence is not just something relevant to diet, right? Yes. It would be divesting from animal industries in general as much as we can, right? So animal testing, but also not wearing animals, stuff like this, because I think because people have so much comfort wrapped up in their diet, they get very tetchy, I think, when people start talking about diets. But I think if people understand that it's a general ethical principle that has a dietary component when it comes to the practice, hopefully maybe that gives people a bit more context as to, it's not just a niche group of antinatalists trying to come for your bacon sandwich.
Yes.
To be honest, it is that, but it's not just that. It's not just that. It's a general ethical principle that we need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, though, is that with antinatalist advocacy, the reason that we have said animal agriculture as the cause area and not animal use in general is that, and the reason that there's so much focus on diet is that over 99% of the animals that people breed into existence are through food. That it's through agriculture, which is why we've focused on that. So if someone who is not vegan is looking to make the switch, I would encourage them to change their diet first, often because that is the easier thing to do, in the sense of it's the most immediate and obvious. I know that sometimes people can struggle with wearing animals, especially like products. Obviously, I don't have to worry about shampoo, but I know that some people worry about this kind of thing. So we would encourage people to look at diet first. But again, it's not that antinatalists, especially vegan antinatalists, are just obsessed with some dietary fad. It's not just some like hobby. It's a general principle that relates to our relationship to animals, all sentient beings, and the idea that we don't think we should be breeding them into existence. And therefore, there is this big focus on diet, because again, through agriculture, we breed in way more animals, way more sentient beings than other actions that we take.
Yeah, no, 100%. Should we go on to number 3?
Yep, we're going to number 3.
So now I actually think number 3 is perhaps the biggest one in terms of the effort you'll have to put into it. Maybe you'll disagree, and also how much effort each of these take will depend on the person as well. But number 3 is planning your career, right?
Yes.
So I'll just give a brief intro to this one, and then you add anything, John, that you want to add.
Sounds good. I've got one quick, just before we get into the career point, about the first 2 points, and that is the first 2 points: not having any more children and going vegan. They're to almost get you to the point of where you're not contributing to any more sentient beings being brought into existence as far as possible.
Duties.
Exactly, yes. So you're actively not contributing to any more beings coming into existence, and then like these later 3 points are kind of like, and what now?
Yeah.
You've sorted your own house out. You're living in accordance with your antinatalist ethics. But now, what are the positive actions we can take to do even more good beyond personally not contributing to breeding of sentient beings? But yes,
Yeah.
sorry, I was just going to.
No, 100%. And also, just to quickly add another bit on top of what you've said, the first one, i.e., not having any more children, can actually help facilitate these other ones, because obviously you'll have more
Absolutely,
time
yes.
and energy and resources to put towards
Yes.
these other ones.
And you don't have to worry about convincing your kids to go vegan because you didn't create them.
Yeah. So, yeah, the third one is planning your career. Now, this, to a lot of people, if they may think, well, like, this is a massive thing. Like, how am I going to, I mean, my career is like a massive part of my life. How am I supposed to, what relevance does this have to antinatalism? Now, so the fact that your career is such a big part of your life in terms of the energy and time that you spend
Yes.
on it, right? Like, people spend an enormous amount of time in their career, right? After they get to the point where they can work, and then before the point where they retire. Now, given that's the case, that's a massive asset at your disposal, something you can leverage to doing good in the world, right? And different careers that you can get yourself into, or different job roles, will have very different outcomes when it comes to whether it has a positive impact in the world in general, or whether it has a positive impact that specifically aligns with antinatalism, right? Now, I don't know how much we want to get into the specifics of specific career paths now in this live stream, because we probably need to think about it more and discuss it more before we release the actual, official 5-step guide.
I think that can wait for sure.
Yeah, but I think we can speak in general terms in that your career is a really valuable asset that you can decide where you put the time and energy into. And if you decide, well, we encourage you to pursue putting it into or using it in such a way where you're being intentional about the impact it can have in terms of improving the world generally and trying to reduce the number of beings that are coming into the world. Do you have anything to add on the career part, John?
Absolutely. I think, as you're saying, it's such a huge asset, such a huge part of our life, that planning carefully what we're going to do with our careers is super important. And unlike the other two, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to have any more kids. Okay, I'm not going to eat animals, etc. This is something which is ongoing. I revisit my career plan all the time and assess where I'm going. And I think it is something which does take a lot of effort. But as you said, Lawrence, we spend, on average, 40 hours a week, probably more if you can consider commute time. It's such a big use of our time and effort. That thinking carefully about what to do with your career is super important. And there are broadly, without oversimplifying career guidance, because again, we could talk about this for weeks on end, there are broadly two paths for people to take. And the first path is to do direct work on a problem. Two paths for people to take if you want to have a positive impact, sorry. And the first one is to directly work on the problem. So, for example, there is a charity that does something that aligns with antinatalist ethics, and you go and work for that charity. Now, that's obviously not most career paths, and that might not be an option to you. But another way that people can have impact, depending on their financial situation, depending on whatever career they have, is to use their career to donate money. This is otherwise known as earning to give. And there are quite a few examples of people who think, well, I'm not sure about going and working for charity because it's very competitive and I'm not sure I've got the right skill set, whatever it might be. But I do have the option to go and work in finance or go and work in a tech company or do something that's quite highly paid and then donate quite a large proportion of money to charity, which allows the charity to go and do the good work that you agree with. So those are your two broad options. There's working on the problem itself, and then there's earning to give money to organizations that are working on the problem.
Yeah. So, and one I don't know if the word is addendum or whatever, but one slight sort of add on to that is that, you know, when people talk about earn to give, some people that are not as familiar with or haven't, you know, some people that may conjure up this image of sort of like, you know, encouraging people to become a sort of ruthless capitalist billionaire or something like this.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, if there's a way that you can, in an ethical way, become a billionaire, you know, please pursue that, because, you know, you could use that money for really good stuff. But this is kind of missing the point. Essentially, what is being said is that one of the options is specializing in something that directly does good. But if you don't have those expertise or those skills, it's also very worthwhile being career focused in a sector that is not really related to doing good in the world.
Yes.
But if you dedicate yourself to your career in that aspect, and, you know, go for those promotions and things like that, which, let's be honest, many people would do anyway, you know.
Yes.
Then that can also be seen through the lens of doing good, right? Because it's that one is more of a reframing of things. Because I know many people, they say, oh, well, you know, this person is maybe very shallow. All they think about is money. They're just pursuing the next promotion, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, you can view it in that way if you want. But another way of viewing it is that those things can facilitate you having more capacity to help others who are in need of that, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's quite a valuable reframing of something which can be demonized by certain groups.
Yes. And also, you know, it can be really motivating. Like, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that once you get to a certain level of income, which isn't that high, it's really once money stops being a concern for you, you're able to meet your basic needs and the needs of your family or your dependents if you have them, then additional money doesn't seem to contribute to that much more happiness. You know, you've already got a car that gets you from A to B. You're going to be that much happier with an expensive Rolls Royce. You know, you already have enough time out of work. You know, you can already go and relax if you would like to. Do you need to go on an even fancier holiday or whatever it may be? So therefore, there seems to be a ceiling when it comes to earning money for your own happiness that is surprisingly low. I thought the numbers would be a lot higher, to say that once you get to a certain threshold, then happiness doesn't seem to go up by much. But when it comes to doing good, the sky is the limit. The sky's the limit. There is no, you know, if you donate twice as much, you'll do even more good than you otherwise would previously. And that can be a really motivating thing in people's careers, is to think that, okay, if I was just doing this career for myself, then maybe I would struggle to be motivated to go to my 8 o'clock, Monday morning meeting. But if you're doing it because you have this overall plan to do good, that can really motivate you in a way that personal gain might not be able to.
Yeah, 100%. So should we go? I mean, we've kind of already mentioned it quite a lot, but going on to number 4. So step 4 is starting to donate. Yeah. Now, one thing I very quickly want to comment on, which is a bit of the wording, which is funny because it's only 2 words, but a really important word donating there is start. Yeah, is start. Yes. Right. I think maybe, I don't know if I'm sensationalizing here, but perhaps the most important step when it comes to donating is just starting. Yeah. Even if it's just £5, $5, whatever currency, a month, right? And it's just to one charity. Being able to, or just taking that first step it's a complete mindset shift. At least I found it was, right? Like, once I'd made that first donation, it kind of gets you into I guess it's like making the first donation and setting up that regular donation is like getting into the car. Yes. And you can start off driving slow, and you can put you can put the pedal to the metal whenever you want and really go fast and increase your donations. But again, this comes with time, and your capacity will change over time. Maybe you get made redundant at some point. You've got to lower your giving. Maybe you get a promotion. You can increase your giving, all this sort of stuff. But the key is starting and just consistently having that regular donation, right? Yes. Even if you reduce it way down to the bare minimum when you're struggling, Keeping that regular donation is I don't know how to describe it, but for me, it was just like a mindset shift of like, this is just one of my outgoings now.
Yes.
And it's an outgoing that I actually feel positive about, rather than paying off a mortgage or paying my electricity bill or something like that. Like, those things don't really make you feel good.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's an outgoing. You can have it in sort of two mindsets. You can put it in the mindset of like, this is just an outgoing like all the others. It's just something I have to do. But then you can also see it in a positive way of being like, I'm actually glad that I have this
Yes.
outgoing. So I think that's really port is the word start.
Yes.
Yeah, and then obviously, you know, the rest is sort of history, and as your capacity grows, you can increase your giving and stuff like that. But do you have what sort of general stuff do you want to say on starting to donate?
No, I'd absolutely agree. Like, the hardest part of picking up a new habit is just showing up,
Yeah.
getting started, whatever it might be. And as you said, unlike other bills that leave my account, I actually feel good about this one. And it's automated. I don't even have to think twice about it. I thought that once I started donating, I thought that hopefully I would just get to a point where I feel neutral about it. Like, I'm not angry when I see my phone bill go out every month. I thought hopefully I'll get that way about donating. But now I actually feel positively about it. So I know this is something that's, is positive. And our habits really shape the kind of people that we are, and can to a large extent shape our self-image. You think of yourself as someone who donates, someone who's trying to have a positive impact. That can be really motivating and motivate you to keep on donating. And as you said, Lauren, sometimes life circumstances change. For example, I'm reducing my donations towards the end of the year for a short period of time because I'll be supporting my partner, which means that my bills will go up massively. And I'm planning on reducing all of my outgoings, including my charitable donations, for a short period of time, and then picking them back up again for lost time once my partner has found her feet. But as you said, just keeping that habit going, keeping the habit going. It can go up, it can go down. But being in the habit of someone who donates regularly to charity is motivating for continuing it.
Yeah, and yeah, for me as well, just to be real, I had a large outgoing recently, and I temporarily reduced my my giving. In fact, it's still suppressed as to what it was before, but in the next couple of months, I'm going to be getting it back up to, and then going a bit above to compensate for the fact it was lower before, to sort of balance it out. But yeah, it's just like, everyone's lives are complicated, things happen, but trying to keep that thing consistent is really good. The amount can vary, but the consistency is key.
Yes.
And there are ways. I mean, we don't want to go into too specific detail now because there will be much more in the guide. But there are ways that you can, as John said, just set up a direct debit. You literally, all the effort is just at the start, and it's not even effort. You just have to type in a few things on a website, and that's set to direct debit, and it's each month it just goes out. You can literally forget about it.
Yes. And your live stream with Conundrum recently really touched on that. Like how easy it can be to donate and just making it part of your life.
Yeah. Right, we've actually got a question.
Sure.
So let's bring it up here. So CDA activism, cheers for the question. Do you ever donate to animal rights orgs? And then they also put another one, but I can't get them both up on screen once, just saying if so, why? So do you want to go first, John, and then I can go after?
Absolutely. Yes, the answer is yes. Because of the reasons that we talked about earlier in terms of animals, sentient beings coming into existence due to animal agriculture and other things. In terms of which ones I donate to, I recommend checking out Animal Charity Evaluators, or ACE. They tend to evaluate charities based on their impact, give recommendations. All of these charities, the ones that I tend to focus on, are actually listed on Antinatalist Advocacy's website. Things like the Humane League, Wild Animal Initiative for Wild Animals, Animal Ethics, these kinds of organizations. In terms of why, as I was saying, it's just touching on those things that we mentioned earlier around sentient beings coming into existence, unfortunately living very bad lives and suffering. And any organizations, or like effective organizations that are driven by impact, that are working in this space, I think have a tremendous capacity to do good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an insane amount to add to that because mine's very similar. But yeah, I do also give to animal charities. and I use ACE. It's a great resource.
Yeah.
And yeah, as to why, it's just the stuff we said before. I have my sort of well, it sounds weird to say my negative duty stuff, but I try to fulfill my negative duties as best I can, right? So I'm vegan,
Yes.
etc., etc. But I also do want to go beyond that and do things that I think are a good thing to do in the world and improve the world. And one of those is donating to animal organizations, because I do not have the time, energy, and competence to do what those people are doing. So I will just help fund them, and I will put fuel in their engine, but they're at the steering wheel because they are much more responsible drivers.
Yes, and this
yeah.
is something that I think that other communities, and we both come from the animal rights, animal activism community to some extent. Something that they've tended to get wrong is that there's a lot of emphasis on doing the good yourself, especially in your free time as a volunteer. And while I do think that can be noble and a really worthwhile thing to do, I do think that there is it's drastically underrated how much paying the professionals to do the work, those who have the competency, the time, the skill, the expertise, etc., paying for them to do the work that we would like to do, instead of putting pressure on us to try and do that work in our free time, as well as putting food on the table. It's definitely underrated in the animal activist community, and I think in other communities as well that seek to do good.
Yeah, and that's obviously in no way to discourage anyone from doing things themselves. Like,
Yes.
it's really good to do both. All of us have our own skill set, and we will have a unique way of being able to contribute to making the world a better place. But we can also all sort of do that in tandem with using some of our financial resources or whatever other resources
Yes.
to help fuel the change that others are making. So I think it's really good to do both, and I try to do both.
Definitely.
Cool. And then CDA actually asks another follow-up question. What about individual activists, like the ones who are always getting arrested so they can't get a job? So
I'm happy to talk to this one if you want.
Yeah. Well, let me just clarify what the question is, just so you're understanding it the right way. So I'm understanding what CDA is asking is in what can those individual people do who, and then they give an example of like, what if someone's got arrested, they can't get a job? Like, what are these people supposed to do? Is that how you understood the question?
Definitely how I understood it in terms of like,
okay, cool. Yeah, go for
they're
it.
not in a position to work.
Yeah.
So one thing I will say is that these rules are quite general, in the sense of we're trying to make rules that are accessible and apply to lots of people's situations, things that lots of people can do. Now, as you said, in terms of using your career, maybe your career could be as a full-time animal activist, and you don't necessarily have a job, so to speak, but you use your time to do those kinds of activism. One thing I will say is that the evidence base behind those forms of activism is a bit sketchy, especially something that we were just talking about now in terms of trusting the professionals from the organizations who use data, who use impact to try and be as impactful as possible. They're often in a much better position to do impact than individual activists, individual volunteers, for example. And that's why we think it's underrated, especially in the animal activist scene, to trust the professionals and to support those professionals who do it. Now, there might be some individual activists, someone like Joey Carbstrong, for example, who's got a huge following, or Earthling Ed, a huge following, a lot of influence, a lot of opportunity to do impact. And it might be worth supporting those individual activists. Certainly wouldn't begrudge anyone who was donating to support like those activists, but that doesn't mean that we should all try and be like Earthling Ed. One thing that we haven't touched upon yet is the idea of an opportunity cost. The idea being that whatever choice that you make is a choice. Whatever choice you make to do something is a choice that you made not to do something else. And in a lot of cases, especially in the animal rights community, people aren't factoring in the fact that they have sacrificed their career to pursue another form of activism, typically volunteering, and whether or not it would be more impactful for them to pursue the career route. And from our understanding of the evidence, that career route tends to be for most people, the best one to follow in terms of being impactful. But there will be cases where, or individual activists where they will be able to have more of an impact by not following these 5 steps.
And the only other thing I'd add to that is like it can be good to donate to individual people, but we've also got to recognize that like organizations, they are just collections of individual people, right? So
Yes.
that's just a way of giving money to a group of people that is working on a specific project, and it will be distributed amongst them in however they see appropriate to achieve their goal.
Yes.
And even people like Earthling Ed, Joey Carbstrong, you know, they're often more a brand now that, and I don't use brand in a disparaging way or a negative way. They are more a brand now that they figurehead rather than an individual in and of themselves, because both of them are supported by people, you know. So Joey has
they have a support team behind them.
Exactly. So they are in themselves, even though the brand is their name, they are in themselves small organizations.
Yes.
Cool.
And one more thing, sorry, just about the arrested example. Like you as I was saying before, with the trade-off, you have to trade off: is it worth being arrested now? What would that mean for my career choices down the line? Like in the long run, like one of the things that we are talking about here with these 5 steps is impact in the long term, not just in terms of the short term, but over the long run. And if you sacrifice your career because you're getting arrested due to individual actions, that is a trade-off that you have to make. You have to decide whether or not you'd be more impactful if you kept getting arrested and sacrifice your career. And there may be cases where definitely getting arrested is the more impactful thing to do. That is the in terms of, from an impact focus, it is the right side of the trade-off. But from our understanding of the evidence, follow you thinking carefully about your career and using that is the best way to go.
Yeah, and if there are people, well, there obviously are people, I know some of them, but of the people who have done something like get arrested, which severely restricts, you know, career avenues that they can use, that, you know, it's just a matter of seeing what the options are available to you and pivoting into the one that you know you could train in, or you think you could do best at. So for example, if someone has been arrested, this is obviously going to limit them in some ways, but they are going to have some form of capacity to do good, right? Either if they have some sort of job that is more open to people who have been arrested, or if they are living on sort of state support or whatever, they're going to have some resources at their disposal, and there are some very cheap ways of doing good and having an impact, right?
Yes.
So one very cheap way is YouTube channel, right? Like there's some initial upfront investment which you can save for over time, but like once you get going, you can do it very cheaply. Same with running a podcast or something, right? There's only like 3 that I can think of off the top of my head, Antinatalist podcasts. If you wanted to start a podcast that you know, you could sort of see a trajectory for it of having an impact, and generally, you know, sort of encouraging more ethical thinking and more considered thinking, this is a worthwhile thing that you can do with the options available to you. So, you know, obviously it's hard for us to comment on every individual circumstance that people are in, but there are always going to be ways that you can bend your impact in the world to be more positive. Cool. Lucio has just left a couple of comments and said that their career right now is developing alternatives to animal testing, which is pretty interesting and pretty cool. So yeah, so for example, you know, this is one example of someone who's using their career to do good in the world. You know, a very worthwhile endeavor. And they say while doing vegan outreach and only doing legal activism so far. I'm guessing the emphasis is on the two words so far there.
One thing I will say, Lucio, is if you're having an impact through your career, please do think about that before you do anything illegal and potentially put your career at risk. Think about that, just both in terms of the direct impact that you could do, but also the donations that you could give if your career progresses.
We've also had a comment from Nomad of Omelas, whose name John is a big fan of. So yeah, they say earn to give isn't discussed much in the AN space or antinatalist space. Is there a reason for that? Then general message thus far seems to be continual personal activism and donate on the side to effective orgs. I think what Nomad is saying there is the general message that we've been talking about is continuing personal activism and donate on the side, or I don't know if he's saying that that's the general antinatalist sort of message.
Yeah, I
But
understood it as the general antinatalist message.
oh,
rather
okay,
than our
cool.
personal
Okay,
one.
cool. Yeah, so I can give my thoughts. So why is it not really discussed in the antinatalist space? You know, it could be for all matter of reasons. I think when it comes to activism, the antinatalist world is like in its very early stages, and you know, like in the vegan space, there's been activism around it for many decades now, and so people have had a lot of time to think about the forms of activism we want to participate in, experimenting with different forms of activism that you want to participate in, and really what are the ones that are worthwhile pursuing. And obviously, you know, as many of us will be aware, those debates are still raging on, right? And everyone has
Absolutely,
their
yeah.
opinions, and people even fight over it. The antinatalist world is much more um it is kind of just like starting out, right? Now, one benefit that we do have as the antinatalist world that is just starting out is that because there's not really that much of a big culture of doing activism or really, you know, putting intention into having an impact in the world, we have an opportunity to be able to have real influence in steering where the community goes and how the community views that. But also we have the benefit of there being pre-established structures that are already built. We talked about one already, ACE, Animal Charity Evaluators. It's not like we had to make any effort to put that together, right? It just exists already, and we can use it now as a resource and send people to it. And that is an extraordinarily valuable resource for antinatalists to be able to do good in the world. And we had to make no effort in putting it together. So, you know, we're unbelievably lucky to be able to have a resource such as that. And that's just one of them. So the final thing I'd say on it is I agree with Nomad of Omelas that earning to give and donating in general is not that widely discussed in antinatalist circles, and I think that's just because the discussions around doing activism and having a positive impact in the world haven't, you know, really matured yet in antinatalist circles. You know, I mean, people are still sitting in Discord servers discussing what's the best way of, you know, some sort of antinatalist global domination, which is never going to happen. You know, so we haven't even moved out of that period. But yeah, I think with time it will change, and we're very lucky in the fact that many of the structures that will help us actually tangibly have a real impact in the world are already there.
Yes.
So yeah, do you have anything to add, John?
Definitely. First of all, just want to say to Nomad Omelas about your name. What Lawrence was saying is that I once read your name, the Omelas. I thought it was an R and an N instead of an M, so I started calling you Ornelius. And I was like, "Well, Lawrence, did you see that Ornelius guy's comment?" And I didn't know the story of Omelas, so I'm sorry for disrespecting what is quite an epic name for an antinatalist.
It is Lucio says in the comments it's a based name. It is a
It
very,
is.
I don't know how much energy it took him to come up with that, but it's a good name.
So sorry for disrespecting it and just calling you that Ornelius guy. I do think potentially another factor is something that Lawrence touched on earlier. It's why in a lot of communities that are focused on doing good, there isn't that emphasis on earning to give. And that is that this idea of being a big dirty capitalist who's greedy, money grabbing person and being all saintly instead and earning not very much money. And I say this as someone who earns not a huge amount of money in the charity sector currently. So people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I may switch to earn to give one day. I'm not currently pursuing that route. And I think this is a bit of a shame, to be fair, because it does limit the capacity that people can do in terms of this emphasis on capitalists and billionaires and greedy rich people. I think that it ignores the potential that money, or potential good that money can do, and that people who acquire money can do. And I do think that is a bit of a shame. One thing to say is that obviously Lawrence and I are looking to try and help foster a conversation and a culture of giving in the antinatalist space. But it's definitely is tricky. It definitely can be difficult to speak about donating. So the more people who do speak about donating, who encourage it, and also, as I was saying before, encourage it is a really positive and kind of happy, joyful thing to do. Especially here in the UK, talking about your charity donations is seen as, not the done thing. It's seen as big-headed or something like that. But I view it as something that, as we say, something that's really positive in my life. Like, I'm like going to the gym, something to feel good about, something that can be a bit difficult from time to time, but it's definitely something to feel good about, build a habit around, and feel proud of when you see that money leaving your account every month. So yeah, just to say that we are looking to build more of a culture around it in the AN space.
So another interesting comment. This isn't a question, but it's an interesting comment. So Lucio says, I really wish someone did an effectiveness study for charities such as Marie Stopes International and Population Services International when it comes to preventing births. Now, this is an interesting one. So as far as I'm aware, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only, so on Giving What We Can as a website, right, they have sort of all their, the recommended charities and stuff. Yes. And it's a really good place where you can set up an account, do all your direct debits all in one space, and they just go out. It has the, gift aid, all that sort of stuff. And as far as I'm aware, the only charity when it comes to the only charity that's relevant to births is, or human births, I guess, if we're being specific, is Family Empowerment Media.
Yes.
Am I right in that? Are they the only one? So there is one
that
has been, but it's not based on births, right? It's based on maternal deaths, I think, is how they've rated it.
Yes. So in terms of, and it's ironic because I do actually work in charity impact and evaluation. As far as I'm aware, there aren't charities that are currently rated on number of births prevented.
Yeah.
At least for people, it may be the case, and I know that I have seen studies not about specific charities in particular, but about like the impact of going vegan and the number of animals not bred and this kind of thing. But for people, I don't know. So I do believe, and again, I think a large part of that is because most people think that disagree with us that human births not happening is a good thing. Obviously, that's what we think as antinatalists. And a lot of people obviously think that disagree with that. So it's not a common metric that's used in impact evaluation, it's fair to say. So yeah, I would definitely agree, Lucio. I would love to see that study as well. And I think those kind of studies may happen one day if there is more of a culture around ethical reasons for not having children. And we do get more charities that are explicit in their intention around not having children. Because at the moment, you could imagine someone doing a study for a charity like Marie Stopes or Population Services International, and then people using that as a criticism of them to say, look, they're preventing humans from coming into existence. It's terrible. It's eugenics. It's you're denying those children from having a positive life. So I can't see those studies being commissioned at least in a positive way until we have a bit more of a culture change. But I would love to see them, that's for sure.
Yeah, so just very quickly touching on Family Empowerment Media again. Yeah, what I wasn't saying is that rate their effectiveness has been rated by the amount of births prevented. Yes. It's just that they're the only charity that do prevent births and have been rated effective.
Yes.
But those two things aren't necessarily linked, is what I was trying to say. But yeah, it would be interesting. And also, Morality Without Addiction raises an interesting point of saying, I can't imagine what metrics would be meaningfully, I guess, used to gauge if the effectiveness of antinatalist activism or, different charities that prevent births, which is a very interesting point and a point that John and I have discussed before. I can't remember if we've discussed it on a live before, if it was just in a private conversation. But it's an interesting point, and I think, maybe you already have developed thoughts on this, John, but for me, it would be really interesting. This is one of the reasons why antinatalists really need to nurture a culture of being intentional about our impact and pursuing things like this, basically, because it's hard to think of a group that is going to pursue finding a metric or some way to at least somewhat accurately measure impact and effectiveness of preventing births, which I do agree is probably a particularly tricky thing to be able to measure, because you're never going to know the counterfactual. But there's probably not going to be any other group that would be dedicated enough to research that. So it is kind of on antinatalists to help nurture this culture and build these things ourselves.
Yes.
So, I mean, if there are people watching who are interested in that and want to try and, have the skills to be able to come up with these things, that would be such an interesting thing to see someone research.
Yes.
But yes, John, did you have anything to add?
I think a really important thing in the conversations around antinatalism and being effective that often isn't called out is an assumption that by antinatalism and effectiveness and impact, we're always focusing on reducing the number of births. And I think this is an important component of antinatalist activism, but it's not the whole ball game. I wouldn't necessarily consider, animal rights charities to be doing antinatalist activism, at least not on the tin. But certainly the activism they're doing is aligning with antinatalist ethics by preventing this, countering the harms of coming into existence. Arguably, any charity that is reducing suffering, including suffering of beings that aren't, let alone beings that come into existence, but beings that exist right now, any charity that's doing that is arguably aligning with antinatalist ethics by protecting individuals from coming into existence. And I think this is something that is really important, a really important thing to do when it comes to measuring impact, is to look for the work that's already being done, whether or not it says antinatalism, and look at the effectiveness of that. And that is something that Lucio has just brought up in the chat that I can see on the screen.
Yeah.
And that is, you can support antinatalist activism without even bringing up antinatalism as a position. And I would consider, encouraging people to go vegan, distributing contraception, preventing sentient AI being born, trying to alleviate the suffering of all sentient beings, including beings in the wild, for example. I would consider all of that activism that aligns with antinatalist ethics, even if it's not antinatalist activism per se.
Yeah, and what I'd add is what Lucio's saying there, and you've just talked about, John, about, we can do antinatalist activism that isn't even explicitly antinatalist, but it aligns with it. And to be honest, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know the future, but I suspect that the majority of the impact that antinatalists are going to have in the future is probably going to be that type of activism.
Absolutely, yes.
Just because that's where the massive... Exactly, it's not antinatalist on the tin, because one, you can just build such a wider base of support for those initiatives and get more funding, but also those sorts of initiatives have pre-existing structures. The antinatalist ones, not so much, if at all, right? So they're a really key way of viewing antinatalist activism is not to just fixate on putting the antinatalist brand out there. That's one element of it, and it could even be argued that is a sort of minority element of it. The real key thing we should be doing is thinking, how can we have a positive impact in the world that aligns with antinatalism, that doesn't necessarily have to be putting the word antinatalism out there on the tin, right?
Let alone focusing on reducing the number of births.
Yeah, exactly. There are many forms of activism that will align with antinatalism, and yeah, exactly. So
I was going to say, Lawrence, I'm going to have to shoot off at 8. So did you
do all right? Okay,
fifth
cool.
And final, fifth and final step of the 5
Okay, cool. All right, let's go on to the fifth and final step. I do know there's a couple of questions in the chat. I apologize, we're not going to get to them, but if your question isn't answered in this live stream, put it in the comments once the live is done, and because then they'll be there and we can continue the conversation there. So that'd be really good. Right, so number 5 is build the antinatalist community.
Yes.
Now,
should we just quickly recap the first 4 steps? So
okay,
get build up to that point.
Yeah. So the first 4 steps. First one, don't have any more children. This is partly a negative duty, but it also helps you to realize some, I don't want to say positive duty, but it helps you realize it helps you realize your capacity to do good in the world.
Absolutely,
right? Whether you frame it as a positive duty or not, whatever.
You can donate more money. You can take a bigger gamble with your career. You don't have to try and convince your kids to go vegan. Like, it's way
Yeah,
easier if
yeah.
you choose not to create those kids.
And then number 2, again, sort of funneling into that negative duty part, is becoming vegan. Avoiding being the cause of new sentient beings coming into existence, especially those with really horrible lives. Then you've got number 3, which is planning your career. This really big part of our lives that we can leverage to do good. Number 4, we're all going to have access to some level of financial resource, and we can normalize donating and donate ourselves as a really good sort of component of antinatalist culture. Cool. And then that's the sort of run up to number 5, which is building the antinatalist community. So do you want to take it away, John?
Absolutely. And when we were thinking about this 5th step, we weren't necessarily thinking of building the antinatalist community in terms of numbers, although that might be part of it. We were thinking in terms of building an antinatalist community in its capacity to do good.
Quality.
So, for example, not quality in terms of people necessarily.
No. But yeah, you get what I mean.
Yes, thinking intentionally about the kind of antinatalist community that would support antinatalists to do good in the world. So we've touched on some of the things now, advocating for people to donate their money, advocating for people to go vegan, signposting people to resources that can help them plan their career. All of these kind of things which can help foster an environment and a community of antinatalists that are in a good position to do good in the world. But also, I do think there is an important part which ties into something that we'll be releasing down the line around building a healthy antinatalist community. There is something in there as well about just being a nice, kind of considerate person, and how creating a positive community, especially a positive community around being good, around doing good actions, can really help foster an impactful community. So not being mean to parents, not being mean about people who aren't antinatalists even, or people who've come into this space after having children, that'd be a big one. While advocating for veganism, not being, too horrible, too harsh, too judgmental on people who aren't vegan, especially if they're making, efforts or steps in that direction. Just being generally a nice, kind person. There's lots of people who subscribe to the antinatalist community who massively disagree with me. And at times I have argued with those people in the past, like I've got it wrong, and I haven't contributed to a good atmosphere in the antinatalist community. So, building the community, not in terms of numbers, not in terms of getting as many people to adopt the antinatalist community, but really, building the capacity of the community to do good and creating an environment where people can do good. I think the phrase we came up with, Lawrence, was building better, not necessarily building bigger.
Yeah. I honestly don't really have anything to add to that, because I think you did like a really good summary. But yeah, I just think it's super important to establish really positive norms that are geared towards, one, not just the well-being of the individuals of the antinatalist community, but also geared towards the capacity of the community to have an impact. I think those are really important things, and it's not something that the community at the moment is focused on, which I think is a shame. And yeah, I think a lot of the norms that are, I don't think they've been intentionally established in the community. There was no, there's not some sort of antinatalist Illuminati that's been pulling the strings. It's just sort of, there's a community on the internet. It's going to have unhealthy norms. It's kind of standard on the internet. But I think if people all muck in and work together, and each of us as individual members of the community make positive contributions aimed towards having a positive impact as a community and as individuals, I think it's just for the better. And I just realized that the comment is still up on screen. Cool. Do you have anything else you wanted to go over, John, on that one before we round off?
No, I think, totally agree with your comments there. Just to say again, this is something that we all get wrong from time to time. We maybe take actions that don't necessarily contribute to building that better antinatalist community we all want to see. But yeah, we think there is a big opportunity for doing that. That's about it from me.
Yeah, so all I would say to round off is just that that 5-step plan will be much more fleshed out with really useful links and resources and stuff later in the year at some point, and we hope to be able to um, help others sort of, or we hope to be able to facilitate others, sort of realizing these steps in
Definitely.
different capacities. Um, but yeah, we don't want to say anything really specific right now, until we sort of officially sort of release stuff. So yeah, I think that was basically it. Do you have any closing thoughts before we finish, John? Or are you happy to?
Yeah, just to say a huge thank you to everyone who has commented and engaged so far. Yeah, as we said, these ideas are still under development. So let us know what you think of the 5-step plan. The steps in the plan, the order that they're in. Again, even though we don't think the order is that important. Any kind of caveats or nuances that you think we've missed today? Anything that you particularly like? Anything you particularly dislike? Yeah, any kind of comments would be super helpful. So yeah, thank you in advance for letting us know your thoughts.
Yeah, and whack them in the comments or on the Antinatalist Advocacy website. There's a link in the description. There is a contact us page, and you can also contact us via there. The email comes straight to us
Absolutely.
if you have ideas or feedback or comments or anything. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching and participating, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Antinatalist Advocacy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We'd also be really grateful if you could help us get the word out there by sharing this episode far and wide, as well as giving us a positive rating on whichever platform you're listening to us on. To find out more about AA, including careers advice, donation recommendations, and different ways to have a positive impact, you can go to our website at antinatalistadvocacy.org. To keep up to date with what we're up to, feel free to subscribe to our monthly newsletter and follow us on your favourite social media platforms. Links to all of the above are in the description. As always, we are hoping you will join us in our antinatalist advocacy.